Hi, I'm Taffi, and I'm at the Mel Fishers Treasure Museum, named after my dad, Mel Fisher. He's the world's greatest treasure hunter. And we have a gem in Sebastian, Florida, a museum where you can come see some of the treasures he's found from shipwrecks. From the world famous Atocha that sank off the Florida Keys, we have lots of treasures, including this 9-foot-long bronze cannon. The Atocha had 40 tons of gold and silver when she sank off the Florida Keys. We also have a lot of treasures that were found right here on the Treasure Coast. We have cannonballs, ammunition, we have displays about how the ships were loaded and how the ships sank, how the Spaniards actually did go back and try to salvage the ships. You can see on the map here, this is the Treasure Coast, and this is where a lot of ships sank in a hurricane in 1715. People wonder why there's so many shipwrecks off the coast of Florida. And it's because the Spaniards were going down and exploring South and Central America and picking up gold and silver to bring back to Spain. And they were following the natural currents of the Gulf Stream, which took them back to Spain and brought them around. And as you can see, right off the coast of Florida, that's where the current goes by. Very narrow passage. They also didn't have the greatest technology and navigational tools at the time. They didn't have GPS and satellites. They used sextants and astrolabes and other primitive forms of tools to give their latitude. They couldn't tell their longitude, so that did not help. Now, the Spaniards were very religious people. We find many artifacts, beautiful artifacts, gold and emerald crosses and rosaries. Maybe they were holding them in their hands when the ship sank. Usually the ship sank because of a storm, and sometimes they sank because they were in a battle with some sort of pirates. So come on, I'll show you some more. I like to call this my family traditions wall. My dad was born in Indiana in 1922, and he later became a chicken farmer. He served in the Army. He was a very big patriot of the United States. He started the dive shop as a hobby and a business because he loved to dive so much. He did a lot of underwater filming. My mother was his full-time partner. And at one time, my mother set the world's record for underwater endurance, staying down for 55 hours and 37 minutes, just to introduce women into the sport. This is me in my first wetsuit. I don't know if you'll be able to see that or not. Looking for treasure. You don't just take a boat out and jump overboard and find gold. You have to do research. We had a very dear friend named Dr. Eugene Lyon, who was a historian who went to Spain and did a lot of research for us and helped us to determine which ships were good targets to go after and actually what was loaded on board the ships. Once you find out general locations, you usually use some kind of electronic devices like the magnetometer. You can drag this tool behind your boat, and if it finds any iron or something that's unusual, it will make a reading on a chart like an EKG. And then we go and dive and look in that spot. When you jump overboard, again, you don't just find gold on the bottom, you have to dig for it because there's lots of sand. It's like the Sahara Desert out there underwater. My dad invented this tool called the mailbox, which fits on the back of the boat, right behind the propellers. And this would take the prop wash when the boat is anchored and blow it down towards the bottom, dusting away the sand, creating a hole so that we could then find the treasure, the iron or the gold or the silver. There's a lot of different types of artifacts, things that they used on board the ship as tools to raise the sails, check the depth, and just general shipboard maintenance. So, of course, when you start finding treasure, other people become interested. We did have a time with the government when they challenged us for the ownership, And my father said we have a great country because we were in court for 7 years and he won. He said you can't do that in many countries. So he was a big patriot of the U.S. and our system here. Over here you can see silver bar from the Atocha. The silver bars had serial numbers on them in Roman numerals. And that is how we were absolutely positively able to identify the Atocha, because the numbers on the bars and the weights of the bars matched the actual manifest, which was the list they made of what was loaded on the ships. We found about 1,000 of those silver bars. Some of them were about 90 pounds. Most of them were about 70 pounds. Here you can see a clump of silver coins before it was cleaned. That's the way it was found. After they're cleaned up, they're very shiny. We use reverse electrolysis to clean the coins. It's a process that uses fresh water and electricity. The coins were about $1 bill back then. 1 ounce of silver was about a month's wages for an average sailor, and it could also buy him a month's worth of groceries and a donkey and a cart to take it home. We also found many of these copper ingots, these big green pizza-like things. They were taking the copper back to use to make weapons. And we do find weapons. Sometimes we find encrusted swords or guns, lots of bullets or musket balls that they use to shoot out of the guns. Many times the wood is completely gone, and sometimes the iron is completely gone from the constant abrasion of the salt water and the chemical reactions it has to the metal. Sometimes the incrustation is all you have left, and you can tell by looking at an x-ray. If you cleaned it or took it apart, there may actually be nothing left inside. Of course, we use metal detectors underwater. Back in the 60s when my mom and dad first started, they didn't have metal detectors. But now we have handheld metal detectors. This display shows you what you might think you would see. It's a little bit Hollywood, but down in the bottom is an actual casting of a chest of coins, what it would look like when you find it. Sometimes we find pieces a little bit at a time because of the oxidation to the metal, the chemical reaction from the salt and the silver, for example. This silver platter or tray was found in about 80 pieces. We can sometimes piece it together if it's found in the same proximity. It takes a lot of puzzle work to do that. They also had shipboard medicine. You can see some examples of different tools they use for shipboard medicine at our museum, along with ceramics, which were like Tupperware. They used ceramics to hold fruits, vegetables, wines, waters, anything that we would use Tupperware for today, basically. We find a lot of pieces from everyday life, buckles and buttons, combs, keys, all types of pots and pans. As you can see, the ocean has had their way with them. Over here you can see some of the tableware that they would use. The average sailor used a wooden plate. If you were a little higher up, you might get to use pewter, and most of the aristocrats, of course, use the actual silver. There's a canteen set in the corner here. Each piece was fit one inside of the other, and you can see the piece that was in the middle is very well preserved, where the piece that was on the outside is almost gone. So we do have a display case of some of our recent recoveries, and just as recently as 3 years ago, we found over 300 gold doubloons, the famous gold doubloons like these here. It was on the anniversary of the sinking of the ship, the 300th anniversary of the sinking of the ships of the 1715 fleet. Now, the 1715 ships were about 100 years after the Atocha. The Atocha sank in 1622 during a hurricane off of Key West, Florida. That was my dad's biggest target. It had over 40 tons of gold and silver valued at more than $400 million on board. That was the estimate at the time that it was found in 1985. Then you start finding gold. Now, gold is a non-chemical metal. It does not encrust or turn green. It shines forever. When you find gold, it looks like gold. It's very shiny. We find every little tiny piece. We leave nothing behind. Lots of gold, lots of emeralds. The emeralds from the Atocha were supposedly being smuggled by the admiral of the ship. It was not listed on the manifest, but in a court document, one of the survivors said, "Why are you persecuting me for smuggling?" The admiral had a 70-pound bag of emeralds. So far we're up to about 4 pounds of emeralds from the Atocha, but we're still looking. And then there's the gold. The gold fastens itself to people's minds. The gold bars that we found from the Atocha and the Margarita in the 1715 fleet all have their purity marked on them in Roman numerals. Most of the gold is about 22 carats. The gold chains are another added bonus. Now, gold chains were not listed on the manifest because they were considered jewelry and they were not taxable. And on the Atocha and Margarita, we found several hundred gold chains, some of them with links as big as an inch. And at one point, we found a chain that was actually 67 feet long. Can you imagine that? We find a lot of beautiful jewelry. You can see some examples of the jewelry that we find here. Intricate designs, beautiful settings, emeralds, diamonds, very rarely rubies, but occasionally. These are gold-plated silver tazas. They depict scenes from mythology. This is the Romeo Juliet or Pyramus and Thisbe and the Phaeton lightning gods. Many of the artifacts we find have an Indian influence, and it's very rare because most of the times these types of artifacts were melted down to make bars or coins. The people of Spain were very Catholic, and a lot of these types of artifacts were considered paganistic. So it's very rare to find something like this. Some of the more impressive pieces include this beautiful gold cup, which is called the poison cup. And the poison cup would hold a stone from a two-stomached animal. It's called a Beswar stone. And the Beswar stone would actually absorb arsenic. So it was like an insurance policy. You can see a Beswar stone mounted in gold filigree there. This piece found on one of the 1715 fleet wrecks right off Sebastian, Florida, actually has some white calcium deposits stuck to the gold, which is very unusual. Yeah, my mom and dad were real explorers. They were ahead of their time. My dad every morning said, "Today's the day. We're going to find it today." He said that every day as long as I remember. That was his motto. And they were pioneers in this industry. And it's really a joy to be able to show everything about them here. You can come in and you can lift a gold bar from a shipwreck, and it's very heavy. It's very heavy. You can't take it with you though. But you can come in our gift shop and you can buy a coin, and you can spend anywhere from say $100 all the way up to, well, how much you got? Maybe a couple $100,000. We'll find something that fits every pocket. This is how we pay for future expeditions. Or you can become a partner and go diving with us. So make sure you check us out at melfisher.com and visit us at the Sebastian, Florida Mel Fishers Treasure Museum.